Hello, fellow Nigerians. Once again, you're welcome to your favorite podcast, Democracy Games. Wow, and I'm really excited today because today we have the big masquerades in the studio. I'm here with senior men. And yes, of course, the senior lady. before they come for me. So we have to the far right, Madam Brenda Anugwom. Ma, you're welcome. Ma'am is the executive director for Nigerian Women Trustfund, and yeah, you know what to expect from her. She's been on this show before now. And after her, we have our boss. Welcome, sir. Mr. Matthew Ayibakuro. He's the governance advisor for FCDO. Sir, you're very welcome and thanks for the support.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Welcome. And my boss, the number one election big. Yeah, Mr. Njoku, and he has traveled all around Africa. Have you completed the tour, sir?
No, not yet.
Doing the work of democracy. So we're going to have a very rich conversation today. And guess what we're talking about? We're learning different perspectives of democracy around the world. Yeah, so today we're discussing democracy around the world, and we'll be learning different perspectives as to democracy. What does democracy mean to people in East Africa, to people in North and Central Africa, and the Nordic regions? We'll just be learning what does democracy mean to these people and what are the systems they have in place to make their democracy work. And let's see how we're going to implement some of that in Nigeria, if we can. I'm sure you people know you can. Thank you for the comments you've been giving us so far. We are engaging you, surely. And for the first question, who are we going to start with?
Sorry, madam.
Ladies first.
Conspiracy.
Ladies first.
Conspiracy.
The men have voted the ladies' lover.
Yes.
That's where we're headed. So, Ma, I don't know, in your experience and travels across the world, does democracy mean the same thing to everyone?
Thank you so much, Orji. Thanks again for having me. Democracy, as we see it, depends on the setting. I'm just going to say that. And what I mean by the setting, I think it depends on what people within a particular geographical zone see it as. We were just given, as when we were taught what democracy means, the simple definition of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But you can agree with me here in Nigeria that it may not necessarily fit that definition from what we have seen from the elections we've had. I mean, if it's for the people, by the people, some people will be asking, are you sure it's for the people, by the people, or by the courts? Because it seems as if most cases now, or rather most elections are decided by courts and not the people. And there have been several instances, even here in this country, where people will vote for someone, and because of some technicality, maybe the courts will take away people's mandates and give someone else the what should I say, winner's certificate. So again, it depends on where democracy is taking place. If it's in the United States of America, people say that's the home of democracy. But some people, draw the history all the way to the Greeks, because the word demos came from the Greek language. The way it is practiced there is totally different from the way it is practiced here. You have a situation where a president will make an executive decision, and the courts will overturn it in the United States. We remember when President Donald Trump banned certain groups of people for reasons best known to him. People went to court, and the court had to overturn those things. And then for a former president to be standing trial, 91 counts against him, this is something that you would definitely not find happening in this part of the world. Although it's happening in South Africa, where a former president it's been tried for corruption and stuff. But in Nigeria, there's certain things that you can see that may never happen, at least for now. Maybe sometime when we develop better in our democracy. And yeah, so that's as far as I can say in terms of what democracy means to people. It depends on where you find yourself. Thank you.
So I see you looking at her, listening. You have something to add to that?
I think there is a normative conversation around what democracy should be and what it is. And I think the point she had made is that the reality, the practicality of the experience of democracy of people vary across countries. The normative conversation of what it should be is quite straightforward. It's a representative government where a few people are choosing to represent the views of the majority, and the minority who lead should be accountable to the majority. It's quite basic. And everything else is built around this system of accountability, of representation and accountability. Unfortunately, in certain parts of the world, you see the representational chain broken by irregularities in the electoral process, by the role of private sector interests, by stuff like that. And then the accountability is broken by failures in the judiciary, failures in checks and balances of the different arms of government. So yes, democracy in terms of what it should be, the general principles are well agreed and understood. The reality of what it is varies very differently on where in the world you are, how far your democracy has fared, the experience of democracy over your history as a country. And of course, as maybe we'll get to at some point in this conversation, the other contextual issues like technology, like security, a lot of other things would have impact on how people experience democracy. But there is a general understanding of what it should be.
So, in your, I didn't mention you're a doctor of law. They don't know. He's a doctor. No, we should state that. So, this is authority speaking here. So, in your opinion, what are the factors that shape democracy? What are the important things to consider when building your democracy, when articulating your democracy? What are the important things in terms of systems? In terms of processes?
So if you want to understand how democracy should be and what is important in it, you should understand the systems of leadership that democracy came to replace. So if you look at the UK, for instance, the idea that it evolved through this parliamentary system was almost a protest against monarchy, right? Against the fact that one single individual or a couple of individuals take decisions over a lot of other people. So when you want to look at the strength of a particular democracy, the key things you should look at is the choice of the people who exercise power in that democracy purely representative? Do citizens actually pick the people who lead them first and foremost? And unfortunately, I don't like building democratic conversation around the elections, but then that is where elections become really key. The electoral system creates a pathway for a truly representative system of choosing the leaders. Once you've gotten that out of the way, you move to the point of whether these people rule in a very accountable way. So you talk about horizontal and vertical accountability, right? So if you talk about the vertical one, can the ordinary citizens hold the people in authority accountable? If a particular leader is going against what he should do as a leader, can people go on the streets and hold him accountable? Can the people who voted them call him back from the votes that they've given to him to say, you don't represent us anymore, you should leave? Then you talk about horizontal accountability. Can the different arms of government hold each other to account? Can the judiciary, like she was mentioning, say the executive is not exercising too much power, it's going to lead to anarchy, we need to hold them accountable? Can the legislature actually say, well, we are representative of the people, you are just an executive, come and account to the people that you are leading overall? So you need to have a system that purely provides that means of representation. You need to have a system that allows for accountability overall. And in the last couple of years, we're now beginning to see systems where people are now actually also saying, well, it's not just a system for the sake of it. Is it actually benefiting the people? That's the instrumental view of democracy. Is it just that we are just playing around, or actually this particular system of government is leading to the betterment of the lives of the citizens?
Wow. Boss, we've heard systems, people, they've mentioned that the electoral system, the judicial, the legislature, and all of that. And I know you've done a bit of work around democracy in Africa. What has been the experience?
So, like they said, yeah, democracy, from what they've already explained and the structure and the processes, yeah, we have a democracy in Nigeria, but the question is democracy actually serving us? So, democracy is, there's a lot of conversations around that system of government called democracy across the world. They say democracy is threatened across the world because a lot of people are saying, is it really actually the best form of government that people can have? So he talked about elections. I always say elections is the not necessarily the foundation, but the basis for which we have election, will have a democracy. Because the democracy, everybody cannot lead clearly. Then people are represented across every region and then every demography. But I'll come to that part of demography. So if people are supposed to, give their powers to who will represent them to lead them and take decisions on their behalf, the process must be through an election. And that the question is, what kind of elections do we have? The kind of representation we have, does it reflect the will of the people and the choice of the people? And if it doesn't reflect the choice of the people, then the democracy will not serve the purpose for which it's supposed to serve. Then the democracy becomes threatened. And that is why we have the kind of democracy we've had in Nigeria. A democracy that is challenged by the process of election, whereby the people's will most times is not what you see. So the process is marred by tokenism, by vote trading. So most times they say the popular candidates are not the ones that win the elections. So that completely threatens what democracy is supposed to offer to the people. The demography of people who are supposed to be represented. So you look at the structure of the demographies in demography in Nigeria, for instance. We'll say the young people are the biggest demography in Nigeria. So at the last election, we had about 51.5% of registered voters that are young people. By young people in Nigeria, I mean people that are within 18 years to 35 years. But then when you look at the representation at the parliament, at the National Assembly, does it reflect that demography? Then when you look at women as well, they say the demography is quite big. What is the percentage of women who are representing us in representing women in the National Assembly? So when you try to compare the democracy we have here and the intentional efforts by government to ensure democracy works, and you try to compare it with other countries, for instance, like in Kenya. You see, in Kenya, the government, after their referendum in 2010, which introduced the new constitution, were intentional to ensure that demographies like the women are fully represented. And for that reason, at the point when they were voting at that referendum, they ensured that there is a rule they call the two-third rule, meaning that no particular gender should be more than two-thirds of their parliamentarians in their parliament. So meaning that, so that gives women an opportunity to participate, because mostly it's usually men that dominate our politics. But by that two-third rule, it means that men cannot be more than two-thirds. So automatically you are giving women, is it 30 or 35% of opportunity to participate in politics and in governance, both appointed offices and elective offices. So to make that now work in Kenya, they did what they call reserved seats that are for women. So there are positions that a man will not contest for. So you don't see situations where you see a man being chair committee on women issues. There are positions that are reserved for only women. And then the country went further, to bring in women so that they are more represented, and also create that gender equality, which is a challenge across Africa. Mostly in Africa. They went further to create what they call their national Gender Equality Commission. So there's a whole institution, there's a whole structure created to ensure that balance, that women are represented. And if you've gone around to observe elections or participate in elections, you will agree with me that most times when you go to rural communities to vote, the highest number of people who you see queuing up to vote are mostly women. So our democracy that is supposed to be that is supposed to ensure representation, this demography of young people and women, are they fully represented? And if they are not fully represented, will the democracy serve the purpose for why it should be the best form of government? So these are issues we will look at as we continue the conversation.
Yes. Ma'am, he just mentioned something about inclusion and quality of life for the experience of citizens in a democracy. I know you've also been in the Nordic regions and you've done a lot of work there. Are there spectacular things in their systems that affect this inclusion?
So that region for me is a region that exists on its own in terms of allowing women to be part of running the government, to be part of making decisions. And let's look at Erna Solberg, who was the former prime minister of Norway. She was prime minister for, I think, from 2013 to 2021. Today, she is the head of the opposition and she's back in their parliament. So, even after serving as head of government, as prime minister, she still went back and became, continued her work as member of parliament, and she's leading the opposition. How many political parties in this country have one woman as deputy chairman? These are some of the things you look at and then you wonder. A woman who was a head of a government went back after her tenure was over, went back to the parliament and is leading the opposition. Yet in this part of the world, it is so difficult to have a woman to lead a political party. I was talking at one of the meetings we had sometime ago, excuse me,
Sorry.
and I mentioned, why don't we have this shared kind of power thing in terms of heads of political parties? And there was dead silence, which means people don't agree. And what I was suggesting was, why don't we have, if you have a chairman of a political party, now there's a man, in the next 4 years, let there be a woman. The next 4 years, a man. Let's rotate. In that way, you have both male and female. And what it's doing is building capacity of women leaders and also showing examples to the younger ones coming that a woman can lead a political party. Now, that aside, look at another country, Denmark. In terms of corruption, Denmark is about one of the countries with the least level of corruption. It's been led by a woman, Mette Frederiksen. And she has been there for how many years? And things are, excuse me,
Sorry.
things are working. So it means that when a woman is at the helm of affairs, things are not necessarily bound to fail. So the question is, why is it that when we see these other countries that are moving forward, besides, let's also know that all the Nordic countries are part of the OECD. They contribute to what we call the IDA, where money is being taken, World Bank administers it, to give to poor countries like Nigeria. So let's just put that in place. So all these places I mentioned are being led by women. They put money in the pots, which goes to IDA, and IDA is replenished every year, and it goes to poor countries, Nigeria being part of it. So which means that it's possible that you can have women leaders and you can have progress. And besides, there have been statistics given to us by the UN Women and other institutions to show that there is development, faster development, when you have inclusive, either inclusive leadership or governance in a place. So why is it so difficult for us in this country, knowing that if we didn't have more women as part of us in terms of governance, we would develop? Does it mean that we don't want to develop in this country, or we'd rather forget about development just so that women don't come in? I mean, I don't know if that's the truth. The men here can answer. Do we sacrifice? Do we sacrifice development just so that just because we don't want women to be part of us? And then I heard him talking about exclusive seats for women in Kenya. One of the 5 gender bills that were thrown out during the last assembly. One of them was about exclusive seats for women. And then everybody came up with this, there's excessive, it's going to make us spend more money and all that. The people who are complaining are the people who are buying 160 million naira worth of cars each for themselves, and then we're talking about costs. So why don't we channel the cost into something that will benefit the country rather than on cars that will benefit one or two people, and after 1 to 3 years the cars depreciate. So why don't we channel that money into recruiting extra women, and let's have extra seats for women in the National Assembly, and have more women be part of governance so that we can develop. I mean, I'm just seeing it as some sort of conspiracy theory. The men are willing to sacrifice our development just because they don't want women to be there. They don't want equitable representation, and they don't want to share.
Well, I agree with her that women are good leaders. But I've had conversations where people will tell you, so recently they say, women, are you sure they are good leaders, or they even steal the most? I mean, so they always bring up the case of Betta Edu, the humanitarian minister.
One case.
And then they bring up the former minister of humanitarian aid. They tell you about this. At the time, the only time they had a woman that was the speaker of the House of Reps in 2011 or so, or 2007. She actually was impeached because of issues around corruption. But that doesn't.
One case.
That doesn't.
And then several cases for
that
men.
doesn't say about. I believe that women are good leaders. Women are better managers of resources, especially when the resources are scarce. Not all women though. But just to put that in there.
So I need to say something about this. So a lot of some of the work that we did in my official role was support the seat for quotas in the National Assembly that failed.
The bill, one of the 5 gender bills.
And in the course of that advocacy, we had a lot of conversations. And when the new assembly came into place last year, I have been a bit of a reflective mode. And I've been in a lot of listening mode rather than just speaking about this. And I think that we need to re-examine the advocacy messaging on this.
Okay.
I think there is an instrumental argument for women to be represented better in political office. And she has given all the amazing reasons why. The data actually supports it. And even if you run a bit of a correlation analysis, you will find a certain degree of, even if it's not causation, but correlation between countries that are better developed, countries that are cleaner, and the role that women play in those democracies, right? Unfortunately, that argument is not seeping into the public discourse in Nigeria.
Why?
Because Nigerians have a way of almost hitting our heads against data rather than accepting data.
What do you mean?
Data, or are we talking about culture now?
No. I mean, the culture conversation is different. When I'm talking about the fact that if you tell a Nigerian that, look, if you vote women into office, we're going to get, on average, on a balance of probabilities, a cleaner country, a country where resources are better managed. In most rooms where I've been, you see these exceptions start sticking in. You know, I say, but what about that woman? What about this woman?
That's the critics.
That starts happening. My argument on this from day one has been that we cannot run something you call a democracy where the leadership does not represent the citizens. We're a country that has a constitution that talks about federal character. What does it say? It's simply saying that you should have a leadership within parastatals, within political appointments, where every single state and region of the country is as much as possible equally represented. Yet we run a democracy where 49% of the population is represented by 3% in office. It is a logical argument that goes to the foundation of our democracy. And when you see this country, we are now the bastion of democracy in West Africa. We are the ones calling out countries for having faulty democracies. And yet we have a country where 49% in average 50% of our population is represented by 3% of that gender. And we call ourselves a representative democracy. We are going to represent religion. We had a massive argument in this country about having a Muslim ticket for presidency or a Christian Muslim ticket. We will try to represent religion. We will try to represent states. We will try to represent ethnic groups. We will try to represent all these other subgroups. But the first fundamental representation of citizens on gender we throw away. I don't get how we even get people arguing against this.
Yeah.
And sometimes the argument gets me emotional because I'm not even going to the instrumental one yet. Let's just say on a basic level, we have how many women in the Senate? 109. 3 women. 109 men. 3 to 4 women in their middle. And we call ourselves a democracy.
So when we talk about
I don't get
like we
it.
talked about democracy, realistically speaking, democracy in how it works in the United States of America or how it works in Rwanda, is that a democracy?
Yeah, Rwanda is a democracy.
Just wanted to be sure.
It's one of our best democracies.
Yeah, well, that doesn't have a vice president and all that. I mean, that's so
man for life.
a president for life.
For life.
So, but my point is, democracy in the democracies, have their peculiarities and their realities. So let's not take out the place of who we are as a people in this nation.
That's the culture.
So that she talked about culture. You can't take out the place of culture from who we are. So we are so culture conscious that once she says her name, Brenda Anugwom, you already knows where she's coming from, and you have some sort of expectation based on where she's coming from. When a woman says her name, so don't forget that this is a country that we are so religious. This is a country that is so. Hold on, I'm coming to that point. But these things influence your democracy.
Sorry, don't mind my face. My face can be expressed.
So this is a country where you see. I'm a Christian, but the other religion, Islam, I know that mostly across the country, women are not allowed to call for prayers. At Connected Development, we'll go to some meetings. We'll host town hall meetings in some communities, not in northern Nigeria, some places in southern Nigeria. And the woman will not be allowed to speak in these meetings. And mind you, these votes come from mostly those rural communities. And you go to meetings and they tell us that no, that the woman shouldn't speak. That is only we, the guys, that have to speak. They are not allowed to speak. These things are real. This patriarchy is real in this part of Africa. So that's why sometimes when you see some of these bills as they push it, it's literally for mostly people that are exposed, that have the exposure and that are very literate. For a lot of these women across Nigeria, they've already accepted the reality of the situation, to see themselves, to think that they are less. We'll still have communities across this country where women are not supposed to go to school because they tell you that why train them through school? They're supposed to just get married and have children. These things are reality. So that's why our democracy is challenged. Democracy is challenged by different other factors. Illiteracy is big in how people understand these things you're talking about here. A lot of people still believe that women are less. I was in a meeting with supposedly a very learned person in government. A learned person. You need to hear how he sounded about why a woman shouldn't talk. And these are one of the people that were engaging when we were pushing for those gender bills. So
I agree with you on the
before
culture.
you come in, this gender bills thing. I am one of those that find it very, it's as if something is crawling under my skin. That in 2024, 21st century, we are talking about these gender bills. And one of them, indigene, where do I belong to now? Do I belong to my dad's house or my husband's house?
Exactly.
Because
Real
from one
issues.
part, they'll tell you, oh, you are married. So that's
Go.
where this part, no, you came from there. So go.
Go there.
And then we have a bill that is asking for indigenship. And people are throwing it away. Oh, it doesn't matter. Just stay there. So you take a man's name, but you don't belong there because anytime he wants, you go back to where you come from. And then another one, Section 26(2)(a) of the 1999 Constitution has amended, which allows only a man to pass citizenship to his spouse. A woman can't. But our Nigerian men here run to South Africa, US, everywhere,
Just
go
to
marry
marry
their
somebody so they
women
can become
and get their
citizens.
citizenship. But you won't let your own women have it. So these bills, when they talk about it, I'm one of those that, it crawls under my skin when I hear that we're in 21st century and we're still talking about such a thing. You talked about Niger. Sorry, not Niger. You talk about Nigeria being bastion of democracy in West Africa. And of course, in Niger, they had a coup, just like Mali and I think Burkina Faso. Do you know that today, the 6th best performing economy on the continent of Africa is Niger? And yet, bastion of democracy. So there's something that is wrong with our democracy that doesn't push development. One of it, of course, as we know, is inclusion, lack of inclusion. So, but why are we, learned people, and you also talked about a learned person you spoke to, against us developing just because we don't want a space for women? I remember an American, Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman who ran for office of president, even though, of course, she didn't win. She said, if they don't invite you to the table, take your folding chair and come there and sit. And she happened to be the first black woman to be elected into Congress because she fought to be president, but, she found herself somewhere. But that was a woman who refused to keep quiet. Ida B. Wells, during the Jim Crow era, that's another American woman, who used, for her dissent was, she used newspaper and started writing and, calling out lynching and the rest of it. And of course, we all know how Jim Crow ended. Sometime in the 60s, it ended. Because there were people who were using their voices. And then you talked about a learned man who was speaking about women not talking. Women not talking, men not allowing women into the space. That is why we are where we are. And that's why I think we're not developing.
I'm just going to say a few words about the culture thing. Obviously, we are all here preaching to the choir, right? We all believe in this. And I think that, and this is probably a conversation away from your podcast, we need to think through how we go about this advocacy, right? Because I feel like when you refer to our culture, there's selective culturalism within our democracy. Because a lot of our culture does not permit of corruption.
Yes.
Does not permit of corruption. Does not permit of embezzling the money that belongs to everybody. A lot of the cultures across Nigeria would not permit of abuse of human rights.
Yes.
A lot of the cultures in Nigeria are built around equality of people. The point is that if you go to the Bible, you go to the Quran, you go to, I'm not from the Igbo, but I have Igbo friends, you go to the Yorubas. There is so much built into our culture that if we were to translate into our democracy, we would be in an amazing place as a country. When it comes to this sort of progressive ideas now, I'll give an example. I am from Ijo, right?
Okay.
In Bayelsa State, there is a culture where, for the Nembe people, you are actually seen as a matrimonial society. You belong to your mother's family, not your father's family. Women play some of the most integral roles in those societies, right? We have cultures that have very progressive tendencies built into them. But those ones, our democracy turns a blind eye to. And then when it comes to issues around women participation, people now say you have to understand our culture. I spoke to somebody in the National Assembly who kept telling me that we are very insensitive to the role that culture plays in society. These are the same National Assembly members that are actually feeding on the wealth of a country that none of their religions or culture would support.
But I want to understand, are we agreeing as it is now that lack of inclusion is the reason why our nation is not working?
Before we get to that thoughts now, because
just one of the many. Okay,
that is why I'm making a very original argument to say it's a representation issue.
Exactly, please.
That is my point. Also, the instrumental conversation we can have, but in terms of representation, it is faulty if 3% is represented. Is representing 100% of a gender, then that's not a democracy.
But realistically speaking, and this is it playing the devil's advocate now? I'm aware that at the last election, this is just playing devil's advocate. I'm aware that they also they had 50% discount for women that ran for offices in the two major political parties.
To buy forms.
Is it
to buy forms?
And APC to buy
if you do some money, they need to use it buying votes. Is it by giving people forms? The form is tokenism.
If you give me free, am I going to get into office?
I want to throw a question. I want to throw a question. And
sorry, we've taken over your conversation.
No. It's actually in line because we've looked at the system, because you can't describe talk about democracy without talking about elections. And now we're talking about inclusion, which is the people, government of the people. How do you get the people through elections? And now what we're discussing now is representation in a democracy. So what has been the experience? How are the working democracies tackling the issue of representation, and how is it going to work? For instance, in Nigeria, we are complaining so much about representation, and Section 69 and Section 110 of our Constitution says that, hey, if you do not have confidence, if you now do not have confidence in an elected member, you can recall them if you don't have confidence that this guy is here to represent you, you can recall the person. But that system, I'm sure we all know what it's talking about and how practicable that is. So the democracies who have advanced and are working and are truly representing the will of their people, how have they tackled this issue? And is there any role technology has played in it?
Well, when you talk about recall, let me start from recall. You'll agree with me that that's just a cosmetics law there.
Does it work anywhere in the world?
I don't think it has ever. No.
Yeah,
Well, in some other crimes,
does.
yeah. But I mean,
It
in
does.
Nigeria here, it has never worked. I know they tried that. They tried to put that on Dino.
It didn't work. Yeah.
And it just didn't
Somebody
work.
from Kaduna.
So one guy from Kaduna, yes, and
didn't work,
it never worked. So it's just there. It's just cosmetics. I don't think.
So how do the people represent their will in a government?
It's true. It's supposed to be true elections. That's why I say election is the foundation. And once our elections are faulty, we'll keep having the kind of representation we are having. So once you miss it at the level of, so in Connected, there's a project we do, Follow the Money, more like trying to ensure accountability in government. But we also tell people, that's why we also do elections, that's why we observe elections, because we tell all our champions, we call them champions, all our colleagues across the communities across Nigeria, we'll tell them, yeah, so election is important, because if we follow the elections like we follow the money and ensure that the process is credible, that the right set of people are elected into office, it means that we will do less work following the money. Which follow the money literally is to ensure that appropriated release funds are used for what they're supposed to do for public good. So election is important, and that once we miss it, and we've been missing it as a matter of fact, I can say that 2023, with all of its shortcomings, was still better than what we used to have in the past. Yeah, we're making progress, but yet we are not where we are supposed to be. And if we keep missing it at the level of elections, our democracy will keep suffering. We'll keep being the kind of democracy we are seeing that is not serving the people that is meant to serve, the purpose that is meant to serve.
2023 for me was marred by the courts. The courts were the institutions that selected some leaders that were not elected by the people. So once you have the will of the people thwarted, it's no longer a democracy in my view. And, of course, like we just said, recall and the rest of it, they don't work here. And the reason they don't work is because the process of even electing the person has issues. The people will make a decision and then elect somebody, and the courts will come overturn and say, oh, maybe INEC didn't stamp the back of the forms or whatever. If INEC makes a mistake, why should the people pay for it? So for me, democracy in Nigeria, maybe let me use the term special. It's not practiced anywhere, and I don't think it can work anywhere in the world except in this country.
It's not working here.
The reason why it's going the way it is because that is what is serving some group of people who have captured the state. And I think that's the way it's going to continue running until, even if we go ahead to amend this electoral act again, I don't think that is the way the way the problem can be solved. He talked about equitable representation. If we don't see that 3 people representing 49% of our population is faulty, then we are not ready for equitable representation. We're not ready for what democracy truly means. There's a particular member of Congress who lied about the schools he went to and everything, and he was caught. They have kicked him out. Finally, member of Congress in the United States.
Oh, he resigned?
No, he didn't resign. He went through a disciplinary.
He was sent out for
and
Congress.
they sent out because he lied. He actually finally came and and said he had to refurbish his CV because he knew that those elements he put in were going to get him elected. And yes, those elements got him elected. And those elements were, the basis by which he was kicked out. Now, that for me, I saw that as, this is a system where when you do something, you are punished. Now, if somebody else wants to go and embellish their CV, when they look at George Santos, they will think twice.
Oh, Santos, yeah.
But if it happens here, and then the court will tell you, who issued the certificate, you don't have a right to talk about the certificate and even
Technicalities.
fine you. I mean, for those of us who went to law school here in Nigeria, you know how difficult it is. One day, I hope it doesn't happen, the courts will force the law school to validate somebody's certificate and force the Supreme Court to enter the person's name on the roll because the person took the a certificate and went to the court. So for me, the problem that we have in this country in terms of election is the role of the courts. They have taken over the will of the people. When you take over the will of the people, it's no longer democracy. You don't see anything wrong with having 3 women represent 49% of your population. There is a big problem.
Sir, final
Yeah, I
thoughts.
know we're out of time. 2 things I want to say. Playing a bit of devil's advocate, right?
Okay.
I think that without excusing it, and maybe that's what's keeping most of us working in this space still going, the fact that as a country, we still retain officially a democratic stance, it's an accomplishment. Because we have a certain degree of diversity that you don't see in a lot of countries. We have a really messed up pre-colonial, colonial, post-colonial history. We have so much that it is an amazing achievement that we are still running on democracy 22 years on this particular Fourth Republic. The second point I want to make is that while I'm not a huge fan of saying this is what people should do, I think, like you asked, how we get this democracy working is for people to understand that democracy is something that you don't just get as a gift and walk away, that you protect it, that you preserve it. While civil society organizations will do the best they can to represent citizens, every citizen has to take this democracy personal and protect it. Otherwise, you will lose it, it will slip away from you. A lot of these countries we refer to, you have countries, I mean, Greta Thunberg that is going across the world now. How did she become popular? This is a lady that took a small girl that took a placard and went to a public office and stood day after day after day, day after day. In this country, when we protest on weekends, and then on Monday, everybody goes back to the office. Protest is over. We wait for the next protest to come up. The way we get this democracy going is to ensure we make use of that foundational power of democracy, which is the power of the people. And that everybody in their little corner takes its determination to say this democracy belongs to all of us. It doesn't just belong to the people who can spend around 60 million on a car. And that in every space they are ready to individually and collectively protect this prize. Otherwise, it will slip away.
Well, yeah,
The
for
final
me,
thoughts, sir.
my final thoughts is not for us here, but for a lot of citizens, since we are talking about, the foundation of democracy and representative government, which is elections. For a lot of people who I think were disappointed with the shortcomings of INEC in 2020 general election, especially in regards to the IREV, the result portal. My message to them is that if you give up, just like you said, the democracy will slip further downward, which will be worse. So my message to them is not to give up. Well, some people, destroying their PVCs. My message to them is democracy is a continuous process. Even in the United States of America till now, their democracy is... So you say America is the bastion of democracy, but the 2020 election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Donald Trump till date still believes strongly that the election was rigged. So my point is, this is Nigeria, and I believe in how many years of democracy now? 63 or 64 years democracy. That for...
It's not.
From
1999.
Our democracy is to do mathematics.
No, for Nigeria.
Democracy.
The Republic.
Republic.
I'm talking about Nigeria as a nation.
Okay,
as a country.
And where we
Okay.
are.
I thought it was
For
democracy.
citizens who were not happy with what happened in 2023, my message to them is that they should go dust up their PVCs and not lose hope. They should be ready. In fact, they should mobilize even the more. For those of them that felt that the candidate they voted for didn't win, but they could see the numbers that they were able to still put together. So my message to them is, it's not for you to give up. Instead, it's for you to go back and mobilize even more. So by 2027, and you should start early to mobilize even more. And by 2023, you get every person that voted and the people that are emerging voters to vote even more and trust the process and hope that way we'll get the kind of democracy and the kind of representation we need across board.
Thank you. Ma'am, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think I will just piggyback on what they have said. Let's have hope. Let's keep pushing. Um, but then while we keep doing it, we need to strengthen our institutions. But then let's just also not forget that the people who we are telling to have hope, hold on to PVCs, are battling with so many other things like poverty, insecurity, that are like hindering us from making efforts to move forward. So if we're able to take care of these issues that we have in our country today, I'm very sure that Nigerians who are fighters as we are, we will not lose hope and we will continue working towards having a better democracy. Thank you.
Wow, people, unfortunately, we have to come to this part again where we have to say goodbye. But beyond that, remember that this country is our own and that a democracy will not develop faster than the people, that is you and I, know how to participate in it. To learn how to function in a democratic setting, please sign up for our courses on our website. Take these courses, they're going to empower you to function properly in your democracy. We have courses on inclusion, human rights, election. You want to be an election observer, right? Sign up for those courses. You'll be certified to go and observe the 2027 election and all the other by-elections that come up before then. Till then, like our page, subscribe, share, tell everybody about this podcast, and we hope to see you again in the next season of the Democracy Games podcast. I remain your host, Orji Stephen. Adios.